Well, good morning and welcome back to another wonderful Sunday School, folks, and welcome to each and every one of you who are here with us today. Today we'll be beginning Daniel chapter 11. Now, we're going to need to break down Daniel chapter 11 probably into several different Sundays. What we're going to do is we're going to look at and explain the text straight up as far as we can today and then the next Sunday. And then after that, we'll start making applications to life and start thinking about how this text works into the future and those sorts of things. So we can expect to take some time here in Daniel chapter 11. I'm going to try to summarize portions. There's a lot of detail in Daniel chapter 11. We're going to try to summarize portions and just get the bare details out as much as possible, and then after that we will just kind of move on to the next thing. So we're not looking to be exhaustive here, although we are going to do a lot of work in Daniel chapter 11. All right, if you wouldn't mind, please pause the video and have one person read Daniel chapter 11 verses 1 through 9. Daniel 11, 1 through 9. Thank you. All right, so let's start breaking down this. It says, "And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." Now, we have to understand something here with what's actually going on in the text. So far, the person saying I is, let's back up here to Daniel chapter 10. You have something like in Daniel chapter 10, verse 7. "And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves." So what's happening here? In the narrative portion of the text so far, the I that is speaking is Daniel. Okay, and the I that's speaking, Daniel. When we're getting into dialogue, we have two people dialoguing in Daniel chapter 10. We have Daniel, and we have the spiritual being who's come to inform Daniel of future events. The figure we talked about last week, which is the prefiguring of Jesus, right? This is the spiritual being who is Jesus, but before the incarnation. Okay, and so they're dialoguing back and forth. By the time we get to Daniel chapter 18, we have something, or Daniel chapter 10, verse 18, we have something interesting happening here. Take a look. "Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me." Who is the first person pronoun? Daniel. Daniel is talking there in verse 18. He's talking about himself. Daniel is strengthened by the spiritual being who is with him. But then take a look in verse 19. "And he said." So Daniel is narrating in the first person. Now he's pointing out that the spiritual being is talking to him. The spiritual being is talking to him, and he said. Now, if you continue on then, in verse 21, you still have that spiritual being talking, but I will tell you. So when you get to Daniel chapter 11, verse 1, what you're expecting is that the me is actually still the spiritual being who's talking. One more time. "And as for me," this is still the spiritual being talking. It is not Daniel. That's confirmed in verse 2. Look at this. "And now I will show you the truth." So the spiritual being is still providing information to Daniel. Okay, it's still providing information to Daniel. Take a look here. It says, "And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him." So this is talking about a timestamp for what the spiritual being is doing and in relation to what Persian king. Again, we've already encountered him in the book. Darius the Mede is going to be, let's take a look here. Now, according to Daniel chapter 6, verse 28, Darius and Cyrus the Persian are the same person, right? So this is talking about in the first year of Cyrus, this spiritual being, who is Jesus, stood up to confirm and strengthen him, right? And we actually would know this from other texts as well in Scripture. Places like Isaiah, in the latter period of Isaiah, between chapters 40 and 66, talk specifically about Cyrus the Persian. Let's take a look and see if I can find that very quickly for us. It would be in some place like Isaiah 45, 1. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him that gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted places. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze, cut through the bars of iron. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, call you by your name, I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord, and there is no other besides me, there is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that people may know from the rising of the sun, and on he's going to go. So that's God speaking through Isaiah the prophet to Cyrus, basically in a prophecy, because Isaiah is not alive during the period of Cyrus. So that's going to be a prophecy. And he's speaking about how God is going to strengthen Cyrus, how he's going to level kingdoms before him, right? That God is going to take Cyrus's side. So when you come back then to Daniel chapter 11, verse 1, you have this spiritual being, 11:1. You have this spiritual being who's talking about Darius the Mede, that's Cyrus, standing up and strengthening him. Absolutely, right? So you get this indication that, again, God is sovereign over the nations, and we've talked about that in previous Sunday school classes throughout Daniel. God is sovereign over the nation and installing rulers. Okay, so we hear that bit in Daniel chapter 11, verse 1. Moving on to verse 2. And now I will show you the truth. Now that word show there in the Hebrew, just looked it up. It's going to be more like report or tell here, especially in the sense. And so show, it's going to be a vision, but it's also a matter of instruction. And so we get some very detailed instructions here. Take a look. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he comes, he has become strong through his riches. He shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Now, here we're going to be referring to very, very slowly. We're going to be working through, for the most part, John Goldingay's commentary here on the text, so that we can understand what's going on. What's going to happen over the next chapter is that actually we're gonna span hundreds of years, and in fact, in some verses, literally hundreds of years are just spanned in the verse with a briefest of words. Okay. And major events can be downplayed, and other events can be brought forward within this interpretation of what's going on through this spiritual being figure who is Jesus. He's going to be accenting some things and simply walking over others. Most likely, what this is talking about with 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. What would happen is that wealth would actually be passed down through the kings. So the later the king, the wealthier the king. Most likely, if they're limiting Persian kings to 4, 3 to 4, there could be two or three things going on. Number one, the spiritual being who is Jesus, or God who's revealing this vision to Daniel through the spiritual being who is Jesus, could simply be referencing some of the big kings, in which case this would be something like Cyrus, who was in 560-ish BC to 530. Then Cambius from 530 to 522. Smerdis in 522 was a small king. Darius the First, 522 to 486, and then Xerxes the First, 486 to 465. So you have 4 kings after Cyrus. Then leaps from Xerxes, who's that 4th major Persian king, all the way to the Greek king, which is going to be hundreds of years later. It could be that, according to John Goldingay, that 3 to 4 may just be a summary for all the Persian kings, right? Like, it goes 3 to 4, right? And it's meant to just provide that leap over in history. Either way, there's going to be a lot skipped here, and it's an intentional skip. The Jesus is, or the spiritual being who's showing us Jesus, right? God is intentionally, and I'm just going to refer to God from this point on. God is simply intentionally skipping from one to another. He shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these. There is one figure for certain that's being talked about here in verses 3 through 5, and that's going to be Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great. First, some information. Alexander the Great arose in 336 AD. So remember, from the time of Cyrus, 560, last of the great kings of Persia, around 465, Xerxes the First. All of a sudden, we're down in 336 BC, right? So we've jumped approximately 100 years within the span of a verse. Really, I mean, we've just gone over very briefly 200 years of history, all right? And so this is actually, for me, without my commentaries in front of me, this is one of the things that makes Daniel 11 really confusing. So let's just take a look at the map, and we'll slow down here. We'll talk about what Alexander the Great did. Here is a map just of kind of the, I would say, what would this be? Western Mediterranean. Okay. Here we have Greece. Okay, up here we have Greece, and you'll notice that this is called Macedonia and Thrace. Those were kind of territories, parts of what we would now associate with Greece. This is where Alexander would have launched his conquest from. Now, Alexander comes down here and takes over Asia Minor, which at this time, which is modern-day Turkey, right? It's called Asia Minor then. Comes down, and he's going to conquer down through Syria. He's going to conquer down through the Holy Land, Jerusalem. He's going to conquer Egypt, right? And this is ancient Egypt. This would have been ancient Egypt's territory. He conquers all of ancient Egypt. Then he's going to go down, and he's also going to conquer Persia, which is going to be over here. We've talked about that. You can follow the Tigris River and the Euphrates River down. You see Babylon. You see Susa. That's going to be one of the capitals of Persia. He conquers all of this area. And now we're going to actually go further, because what Alexander the Great does is really remarkable. He actually comes over here. This way would be Susa, I believe. He's going to conquer all of Persia, all this huge region of Persia, all the way down to India. This is the Indus River here. Okay, he's going to conquer through the Indus River and into India. And I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, because I am going off my memory here, that Alexander the Great actually dies somewhere around the Indus River. Okay, so he conquers what is at that time the largest empire in the world. Period. right? In history, at this period of history, he's the largest empire at the time. But again, listen to the dates, and you can look at the dates. I'm going to try to put it up over here in a little bubble. Listen to the dates. Alexander the Great is from 336 BC to 323 BC. It's a period of 13 years that he rules. In 323, he dies of a fever. Okay, so the greatest warrior, the greatest military leader that the world has ever seen up until this time, dies 323 BC. So when we come back to the text, we see that a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. That's Alexander. As soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity. What does it mean? As soon as he is arisen, usually great rulers, great military leaders and victors will rule for more than like 13 years. That's a really short time. And so it seems like as soon as he's arisen, he's just finished conquering to India. He dies there, right? So it's as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom's broken, divided toward the four winds of heaven. Now, we might want to think and say that the four winds of heaven are the four geographical compass maps. That's not necessarily what it means here. The four winds of heaven just means it's scattered. And really, what we can expect is it's actually his great military generals that take over four different regions of the empire. Okay, and so and only two of them are really going to figure into the rest of Daniel 11. But we'll talk about, we'll see if I have all four written down here. Yep, we have four written down. First is Macedonia, and Greece. So part of his empire divides up into Macedonia and Greece. The other part, though, is then, the second part is then Thrace, which is going to be this part of Greece over here. Okay, so you have Macedonia, you have Greece. That's actually two parts, two regions. Okay, then you have Egypt, which is going to be down here. The Egyptian portion of that empire is going to be kind of standing alone. Then you have the biggest portion, which is Syria in the east. And that's really going to be, at least here. Okay, sometimes it's going to be part of Turkey, at least here, and then all the way over to the east. It's going to have basically the entire Persian Empire remaining to it. Okay, so you have this large portion of empire there. Okay, now the ones that are going to matter to us in particular here, we'll get to in just a minute. Let's go back to our text. Make sure that we have it. But not to his posterity. We've talked about that. It's not to his children. What it is it's to his generals. None of these are going to have the authority which he ruled. And so basically this is kind of rehearsing or expanding on detail that it's not to his posterity. Okay? Verse 5. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Now this is beginning to start to talk about regions and empires, and they're going to emphasize throughout the king of the south and the king of the north. Working throughout history, the title, the king of the south and the king of the north, are really going to refer to regions of Alexander's broken empire. It does not necessarily mean just one person or figure. Okay, it means the ruler of a portion of the empire. And so when we're thinking about the king of the south, what you're primarily thinking about is Ptolemies. Okay, this region or this section of the empire is basically Egypt. All right, so that's the Ptolemy's stronghold. And it's named after the first king of that region, Ptolemy. Okay, and he's going to be the king of the south. Now here you have this nice map. This is from the Zondervan Atlas Bible. Extension of the Ptolemaic rule under Ptolemy I. You see that he also actually has Palestine, and he has Cyprus, and he even has some of the coastal cities of Turkey. Okay, or what's modern day Turkey. It's would have been Asia Minor. And so there's that you have the king of the south. Now in a few verses we're also going to hear about the king of the north. The king of the north is the Seleucids. Okay, and the Seleucids are going to control most of Asia Minor, Syria, and all the way over into Persia and even to India. Right, they're gonna have that sort of Persianist empire plus some. Right, but they're going to be controlled by the Seleucids. Right, and again, the Seleucids is named after the first king of the north. Okay, and so we kind of have that. You also see here, if you're looking right near Antioch, and if you remember Antioch, you're thinking, oh yeah, all right, so Paul went there. All right, so Antioch and Seleucia. Okay, you have the city of Seleucia there in Syria. Okay, that's going to be their stronghold, is Syria and parts of Turkey. So let's head back to our text with our understanding, and we'll continue on from there. Then the king of the south, is the Ptolemies, that's going to be in Egypt, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. John Goldingay says this on page 532. The southern king is generic term for the Ptolemaic throne in Egypt. The Seleucid throne in Syria, Babylon, is the northern king. These are the two most powerful Hellenistic monarchies. There's some interesting history here buried in verse 5 that we just need to detail and expand. And here it is. John Goldingay says this on page 533. Seleucus the First flees to Egypt in 316 from Antigonus. Okay, Antigonus is going to be a different general, most likely over Thrace. Here's what John Goldingay says on page 533. Seleucus I fled to Egypt in 316 BC from Antigonus. Seleucus and Ptolemy defeated, that's Ptolemy I and Seleucus I, defeated Antigonus in 312 and then finally in 301. Seleucus I then becomes more powerful than Ptolemy, though the Ptolemies controlled Judea through the 3rd century. Right? So what's this indicating is that the king of the south shall be strong, that's Ptolemy, one of his princes, one of his rulers, we could say. Right? So then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he. The idea here is that Seleucus, who fled to Ptolemy in the south, they then conquer another general, and Seleucus goes on and creates a stronger empire than he. Okay, and his authority shall be a great authority. It's because of all the territory that he conquers and has. He basically has the old Persian Empire, parts of modern-day Turkey, which is Asia Minor, and then he has all of Syria, so he has a vast empire. Now, let's see here then. We move on to verse 6. After some years they shall make an alliance. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he in his arm shall not endure, but she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times. So, what in the world is happening here? John Goldingay helps us out again, page 532. Page 533. He says we've skipped about a half a century to about 250, skipping about half a century. We were just in verse 5, which are hanging right around 300 BC. Now we're down around 250 BC. And you see how within this vision, you can skip half a century with a verse. right? With between verse 5 and 6, skipping half a century. I mean, this is the sort of time frames that we're working with here within the text. Some things we're going to see are drawn out over a very small time frame. Others just, within a verse, you skip 100 years or 150 years or 50 years in this case. So in about 250 BC, Ptolemy II, okay, so that's the second king of that Egyptian region, Ptolemy II, tries to mend the relationship with the Seleucids by marrying his daughter to Antiochus II. Okay, so Antiochus II is going to be king at this point of the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid kings, the king of the north, the Seleucid kings usually rotate between two names. Goes back and forth between Seleucid with a number after it, first, second, or third, or Antiochus. Okay, and so we're talking about Antiochus II here. Okay, Antiochus II, who had divorced his wife Laodice. So what happens here is Antiochus II was married to Laodice. Okay, they have two children, Seleucus, I believe it's Seleucus II, and Antiochus. Okay, remember the names go back and forth between Seleucus and Antiochus. So that's the name of their two sons. Antiochus the second divorces Laodice in favor of Ptolemy II's daughter, who's going to be named Bernice. Okay, Bernice is sent to Antiochus II. Antiochus II had divorced his wife, marries Bernice. Okay, after 2 years, Antiochus II goes back to Laodice. Okay, so after 2 years, Antiochus II goes back to his first wife, who promptly kills him and the son that he had by Bernice. Kills Bernice and a number of Egyptian attendants. At the same time, Bernice's father, Ptolemy II, dies in that same year. Right? So you have Laodice, Antiochus II, you have Ptolemy II ruling in Egypt. Okay? Ptolemy II sends his daughter Bernice to the Seleucid Empire, okay, where Antiochus II is reigning. Antiochus II divorces his first wife Laodice, sends away her and his two children, Antiochus and Seleucus, marries Bernice. After 2 years, he goes back to Laodice, who then promptly kills him, kills Bernice's son, kills Bernice, and Ptolemy II also dies. That's Bernice's father. Okay? And so all of that is then what's being described with this idea of the daughter of the king in verse 6. The south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. That's a marriage. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm. After 2 years, he goes back to his first wife. And he and his arm shall not endure. Right? Who? Antiochus II. He gets murdered by his first wife. But she shall be given up, that's Bernice, and her attendants. Okay? They're also killed. He who fathered her, Ptolemy II, also died. And he who supported her in those times. Right? So, that's all kind of fulfilled there within those realm of events. Again, we're not looking to capture every detail here. We are looking to go over summaries, and that shall suffice, I believe, for now. Here we go. Verse 7. And from a branch from her roots, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. He shall deal with them and shall prevail. Okay? He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. For some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. So what's happening here in this next paragraph? Verses 7 through 9. First, and a branch from her roots. Who is that talking about? Her roots is Bernice's roots. It's Bernice, okay? What's her root? Her root is her father. So this, and a branch from her roots, is talking about Bernice's brother, the son of Ptolemy II, who is Ptolemy III. Okay? Ptolemy III invades the Seleucid Empire, gains control of much of Syria and of the lands further east, kills Laodice, Antiochus II's first wife, took much plunder back home. He does not press his advantage to conquer the whole Seleucid Empire. He leaves the throne of the Seleucid Empire to Seleucus II due to a rebellion in Egypt. So he goes, Ptolemy III ends up going back home, leaving the Seleucid Empire to Seleucus II after having conquered much of Syria, okay, and much of the lands to the east, much of the lands of Persia, okay. So at that point, the Ptolemy Empire is huge. Now, what then happens with this last bit? And of course, Ptolemy III carries off their gods and metal images. That's kind of a normal thing with conquering. He takes all this wealth back with him. And that's going to be one of the practical applications for later on, but we're going to save that for another lesson. So here in verse 9 then, what do we see? Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. In 242 BC, Seleucus II attempts to invade Egypt, but must retreat because his army is decimated. His army becomes decimated. And this is actually one of the running themes. Usually, the Ptolemies are better generals than the Seleucids. And so here what we see, the king of the north, that's the latter, shall come into the realm of the king of the south, that's Ptolemy the third in Egypt, but then shall return to his own land. That's because Ptolemy the third kicked his butt. Right? I mean, that's basically what happens. And so that's what's going on in those first 9 verses. Let's continue on here. I'm looking at the time. I'm seeing we have maybe 10 minutes. So let's try to just knock out the next paragraph here. If one person could please read for us Daniel chapter 11, verses 10 through 13, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. 10 through 13. His son shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Then the king of the south. So what's happening in verse 10? His sons, okay, this is going to be Seleucid II's sons, which the kingdom of the north is at this point going to be ruled then by Seleucus III from about 226 BC to 223 BC. Okay? And then following that is Antiochus III from about 223 to 187 BC. In 219 BC, so that's under the realm of Antiochus III, Antiochus III conquers Seleucia and much of Judea. So what happens? Remember that the Ptolemies had conquered all of this region up through Syria and then much of the realms to the east, which is going that way. Now Antiochus III recaptures home base of Syria, Antioch, and then comes down and conquers much of Judea. Okay? Ptolemy IV, who then is reigning from 221 to 203, sends out his army to engage Antiochus III at the Egyptian stronghold at Raphia. which you see on the map is going to be right here, kind of on the southern lands of Judea, and defeats Antiochus III. However, the Ptolemy IV makes peace. Antiochus III continues to campaign in Turkey in the east, regaining much in 14 years of the old Seleucid Empire, earning him the name the Great. Right. So what happens? Let's reference back to verse 10. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces. That's going to be Seleucid the Third and Antiochus the Third. Shall keep coming over and passing through. Shall carry the war as far as his fortress. Okay, that means that he's coming down. He's defeating Syria. He comes down, wins in Judea, comes all the way to Raphia, where he then loses to Ptolemy IV, which is the king of Egypt. Antiochus III loses at Raphia. He then retreats, but he ends up reconquering much of the land to the east, as well as much of this land in Asia Minor. Okay, so he's taking back this land and taking some land. That also explains then verses 11 through 12. Then the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north. He shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. The third person pronouns are kind of not helping. This is when Ptolemy IV, the king of Egypt, goes up to Raphia and fights Antiochus III. Okay? Antiochus III raises a great multitude. Okay? But that multitude, which is shall be given into his hand, which is into the hand of Ptolemy IV. Okay, so into the hand of Egypt. Egypt wins at Raphia. When the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies. What's that verse 13 talking about? Again, John Goldingay, on his Word Biblical Commentary, page 534, Antiochus III raised a large army in alliance with Philip V of Macedon. So coming back, remembering that larger map here, you have the Seleucids, who are going to be in this area. Okay, coming on down. Macedon, you see over here. So he allies with the Macedonians, the Macedon, Philip V, and they're going to look to take on Ptolemy. Okay, pouring into verse 14 there. Those times many shall rise against the king of the south. The violence among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. They shall fail. What I just talked about is this very first part of verse 14. So again, army and abundant supplies comes down. It's Antiochus III and Philip V of Macedon coming against the Ptolemies. I don't see if Egypt is actually conquered at that time, but I know that there is going to be a continued Ptolemy Empire, and so I'm going to suggest that they're probably not, but at least that they're going to be coming down to attack Egypt. Let's see here. In those times, many shall rise against the king of the south. Again, what that's talking about, and I just recite it one more time so we can grab a hold. Egypt is ruled by Ptolemy V, but he was an infant. So a regent, Agathocles, was ruled in his place, was very oppressive, and that caused an insurrection in Egypt, which led to Agathocles' assassination. Right? Now we're gonna end there. What do we have so far in the first 13 and a half verses? What we have is a description of Alexander the Great coming down, and then the ongoing wars and alliances between the Seleucids Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. And next week what we're going to do is we're going to get back into the Promised Land, which is simply a battleground and a way of getting in between these two raging giants of Egypt, ruled by the Ptolemies, and the Seleucid Empire, Syria, Asia Minor, Persic sort of things. All right. And so that's really all that's happening there in the first 13, 14 verses. Again, we've spanned 200, 300 years in 13 verses. Some of it is very detailed and yet still sort of obscure, right? And without a really good understanding of the period, like without John Goldingay walking me through every verse and every step, I would be totally lost, right? And so we kind of need to just break it down, say, all right, this stuff is in history. So far, we're going to get to a portion that's not, but so far this is in history. It's providing a type of things to come, and we're looking and we're watching empires battle each other. And if we can capture that, and we know that this is rooted in history, then we're doing pretty well. All right. Thank you so very much, folks. I appreciate you all listening. And why don't you take a few minutes to discuss, take a few minutes to recap here. Thank you so very much. Blessings to you all. Hope to see you all upstairs. Bye-bye.